The cold is brutal. Every breath hangs white in the air, while freezing wind cuts through wool, leather, and steel like a blade. But the white snow is already being stained with blood, trampled beneath thousands of boots as men struggle through the storm. You can barely see the enemy. Through the driving snow, thousands of men scream across the field, their voices swallowed by the wind. Steel tears through armor, blades strike shields and helmets, while blood darkens the snow beneath the feet of men still fighting. By nightfall, this frozen field would become one of the bloodiest battles ever fought on English soil, leaving thousands dead or wounded. Neighbors fight neighbors. Men who marched together now kill each other in the snow, divided by loyalty to rival claims for England's crown. What followed became the deciding battle for the crown of England, fought in a single catastrophic day that would reshape the kingdom. At the center of it stood an 18-year-old, about to become a king or a corpse before the day was finished. Meet Edward, Earl of March. 18 years old, already unusually tall for his age, and carrying the future of the Yorkist cause. His father is dead. His severed head has been displayed by his enemies, a warning meant to terrorize everyone still loyal to York. If Edward loses, the Yorkist claim to the throne could collapse with him, leaving the House of York fighting for survival. Waiting on the high ground is a larger Lancastrian army, drawn from the north and prepared to block Edward's path to victory. 3 months earlier, Edward's father commanded armies and stood one step from the English throne, before disaster shattered the Yorkist leadership. Then came Wakefield. His father and younger brother were killed in the fighting, leaving Edward to carry the family's cause forward. His enemies displayed his severed head on a spike, a brutal warning to the House of York and everyone who still supported it. Weeks later, Edward became the new head of the House of York, suddenly carrying the hopes of a dynasty fighting for survival. He defeated a Lancastrian force at Mortimer's Cross. In London, the Yorkists proclaimed him king, transforming a young commander into England's new claimant. Soon afterward, the new king marched north with his army, knowing another Lancastrian force was gathering ahead. Along the way, he gathered fresh troops from Yorkshire and the Welsh marches, building an army large enough to meet the enemy. The night before battle, cold wind and sleet swept across the waiting armies, leaving thousands of soldiers exposed beneath the open sky. Food was scarce and rest was scarcer. Across the field, thousands waited for dawn, knowing the next hours would bring the fighting. It was Palm Sunday, 1461. Dawn was only hours away, and two rival armies were preparing for a battle neither could avoid. The snow thickened. Across the valley, neither army could clearly see the other through the growing curtain of white. Then the wind drove snow across the field, swallowing the valley in white and turning the battlefield into a shifting wall of uncertainty. Thousands upon thousands of men waited across the field, watching the storm, gripping weapons, while horses stamped nervously beneath the falling snow. Edward took his place among the fighting men, close to the heart of the army, where the pressure of battle would be greatest. He drew his sword, the blade catching what little light survived through the storm as the army prepared for its first advance. Across the valley, the Lancastrians outnumbered him badly, but Edward had one thing they did not: the wind behind his archers. Lord Fauconberg studied the wind and snow, watching how the storm moved across the field before committing his archers. Fauconberg signaled his archers. Thousands of yew longbows bent against the wind, their strings tightening as the first volley waited to fly. The volley disappeared into the swirling white, hundreds of arrows vanishing almost instantly beyond the soldiers who had released them. The wind carried the arrows farther than the Yorkists expected, driving them toward the unseen Lancastrian ranks across the snow. Arrows struck the Lancastrian ranks before many men could even see the enemy, forcing the formation to endure an attack from the storm itself. Panic erupted. Men dropped without seeing the source of the attack, while others searched blindly through the snow for enemies they could not find. The Lancastrians fired back blind, but shooting into the howling headwind robbed their arrows of much of their reach and force. Their arrows fell short in the driving wind, disappearing harmlessly into the snow before reaching the Yorkist ranks. The Yorkists gathered fallen Lancastrian arrows from the snow, collecting ammunition scattered across the frozen ground beneath the storm. Then they sent volleys back into the enemy lines, using the battlefield itself to keep the pressure on the retreating enemy. Furious and half-blind, thousands of men charged down the slope, their armor flashing through the snow as a tidal wave of steel. The two front lines collided, and the battlefield disappeared into hand-to-hand combat, as formations collapsed into a mass of struggling men. It became an instant meat grinder. Poleaxes crushed helmets, swords struck shields, and daggers found the gaps between armor at close range. Within minutes, the snow beneath their feet was churned with mud and blood, while boots slipped across ground that moments earlier had been white. Men were packed so tightly they swung whatever they could reach. Swords, poleaxes, daggers, and broken shields became weapons at arm's length. The press was so tight that even the wounded struggled to fall, trapped among bodies and still moving men fighting around them. You have to shove a corpse aside just to reach the living man screaming behind it, while steel flashes only inches from your face. Edward fought close to the center as the Yorkist line began to buckle, surrounded by men trying to hold their ground. Edward fought on foot among his men, urging them to stand and defend his claim to the throne as the pressure intensified. The Lancastrians pressed forward, forcing the Yorkists backward through the churned snow as the formation slowly gave ground. Step by step, the Yorkists were driven toward the steep ground above Cockbeck, with less room to maneuver behind them. The snow kept falling as exhausted men collapsed beneath the fighting, disappearing under the boots of soldiers still pushing forward. Edward saw gaps opening in the Yorkist line, dangerous breaks forming where disciplined ranks were beginning to lose cohesion. The enemy roared, sensing the kill. The teenage king was one push away from dying here, surrounded by men fighting for everything. You feel the ground shift beneath you, and the sick realization arrives that this frozen mud could become your grave. Edward braces himself as the pressure closes in, while the Yorkist line struggles to withstand one more crushing advance. Then movement appears through the snow. Not from the front. Reinforcements are coming, hidden somewhere beyond the storm. Fresh Yorkist troops emerge through the storm, swelling Edward's ranks just as the exhausted defenders are beginning to give way. Norfolk's arrival tips the balance. The Lancastrian line begins to break, suddenly facing fresh pressure at the moment it can least endure it. The Lancastrian line breaks. Men begin running, abandoning weapons and formations as the battle transforms from a struggle into a rout. Thousands of terrified men turn and run for their lives, scrambling across the frozen ground while Yorkist forces surge after them. It looks like the slaughter is finally over. The battle is decided. The boy king has survived the field. Ahead of them lies Beck, a narrow watercourse now standing directly in the path of the fleeing army. The stream is swollen and running fast, swallowing the ground where the fugitives hope to cross and escape the pursuit behind them. The fleeing men hit the freezing current. Their own armor becomes a death anchor, dragging exhausted soldiers into the water. Many drown in the crush, while panic pushes still more men into the water behind them, leaving almost no room to escape. Men are pinned face down in the water, crushed beneath the boots of their own comrades as the desperate retreat turns into chaos. Accounts of the battle describe a struggle in which no quarter was given, turning the retreat into another phase of killing. More men are cut down trying to cross, trapped between the current ahead and the Yorkist pursuit closing from behind. The pursuit continues, and many fleeing Lancastrians are cut down before they can escape the battlefield and reach safety. The fleeing Lancastrians reach Beck, where the narrow crossing turns the retreat into chaos and forces men into an increasingly desperate struggle. Men struggle through the confined crossing as the Yorkist pursuit closes in behind them, leaving the fugitives with fewer places to run. The pursuit continues northward as Yorkist forces press hard against the fleeing Lancastrians, driving survivors farther from the battlefield. The ground beside Beck became known as Bloody Meadow, a name that will preserve the memory of what happened there. After roughly 10 hours, by some accounts, the killing finally stops, leaving the battlefield covered with the dead and wounded. Silence falls over the battlefield, broken only by the wind and the wounded, while the surviving soldiers slowly begin to grasp what happened. Contemporary accounts gave a death toll of nearly 28,000, a figure modern historians still debate and cannot treat as certain. Edward's victory shatters the main Lancastrian army and secures his path to the throne, transforming the balance of power in England. Henry and Margaret escape north, while Lancastrian resistance survives beyond Towton, meaning the struggle for the crown is not yet finished. After the battle, Edward stood victorious over a field filled with the dead, surrounded by the cost of the crown he had won. Months later, Edward was crowned King Edward IV at Westminster, formally confirming the victory that had begun on this frozen battlefield. Recovered from the site over the centuries were arrowheads, sword fragments, and pieces of armor, silent remains of the men who fought here. For centuries, much of that day lay beneath the soil, waiting until archaeology began uncovering physical evidence of the battle. Centuries later, farmers would still occasionally uncover human remains beneath these fields, revealing that the battlefield had never truly disappeared. In 1996, archaeologists uncovered a mass grave near Towton Hall containing dozens of skeletons, bringing the violence of 1461 back into view. The skeletons carried multiple traumatic injuries, providing physical evidence of the brutal close combat described in accounts of the battle. A centuries-old stone cross still stands beside the battlefield, marking the memory of Towton and the thousands who died around it. Just a windswept field now remains, quietly hiding the bones of men who never made it home after the struggle for England's crown. The battlefield still carries a name born from that terrible day, a name that survived long after the armies and kings were gone. Bloody Meadow, a name that outlived the armies, the kings, and the men who died there, while the quiet fields slowly closed over their memory. And beneath its quiet fields, the dead of Towton are still there, buried beneath the same ground where England's crown was decided.